voluntary and involuntary laborers died during the construction of the statue. It was to be known as Liberty Enlightening the Orient, or Egypt Enlightening the Orient. The project was not rejected because it resembled a peasant woman, as some authors and historians would still falsely claim today, because this particular part of the story was said to remain confidential. During our school days, we were taught as young students about the Statue of Liberty, being one of the most famous landmarks in American history, and how it was gifted to the United States from France. Some of you may recall hearing stories of how the French government gifted the monument to the United States in the representation of celebrating the abolishment of slavery in America. But why would France care about slavery occurring in America if they allegedly had nothing to do with America's version of slavery? So this leaves one to wonder, why would the French government send a random gift to the American government for allegedly ending slavery in America? Did France feel guilty about hiring poor laborers for little to no pay throughout its own slave system, but then later on began to advocate for the abolishment of slavery worldwide? And also, was the Statue of Liberty originally in fact a depiction of a colored woman of African descent? Or is that just a rumor?
Turn it up. Look, 100 years after 100 years, they lied to us about this and that. Told us all we from Africa. I made fiction characters turn into facts. Heard you tell me then it was not. Knowing goddamn well that trick was capped. My wife and I wrote a book about it. It's a book with knowledge, evidence, and fact. And my other book got them haters shook, cause it's helping my people take a closer look. Had their backgrounds in the background, showing my people where they supposed to look. Showing my people where they get it from, where they hit it from, all sorts of angles. When it comes to this research, you must please first, don't trust strangers. Find out all on your own is what I highly recommend and suggest. And if you're looking for answers and content about me, I highly recommend you the best. Which is my website at the link you see just across the screen. Don't let it miss you. I make it simple. I double down on that black and white. It's too official.
Americans have been told that the monument was based on an idea crafted and drawn by French sculptor Frederick Auguste Bartholdi in 1869, and according to some stories, that is partially true. Historical documents prove that Frederick is responsible for the creation of the statue in 1869. However, the initial idea of it is credited to a French abolitionist named Edward René de la Boule, who was the chairman of the French Anti-Slavery Society. Now, this particular portion of the story was later added well after the third rendition of the watercolor drawing was assembled and established as a life-size lighthouse and placed on the New York harbor in 1886. So that Americans may assume that the original idea of the statue was all about the abolition of slavery in general, even before arriving on American shores. But that is far from the truth. The best bet to finding truthful information about this story is to turn to the actual location that French sculptor Frederick Auguste Bartholdi was born, and also to the places he visited in hopes of being hired in the field of his profession. According to the Haut-Rhine Departmental Educational Documentation Center, located in his hometown of Colmar, France, Frederick Bartholdi was born on August 2, 1834, to a Protestant family. where he studied designs and paintings as a child and eventually took architecture courses in Paris during his secondary studies period as a teenager. Although he was primarily known as a young sculptor and statuary, Bartholdi also produced various photographs, oil paintings, drawings, and watercolors during the early 1850s. According to the French edition of the book called Egypt, French Passion by author Robert Soule in 1855, the Ministry of Public Instruction charged Frederick Bartholdi with an official mission to Egypt. He leaves for Egypt with fellow European painters John Leon Jerome, Edward Murrer, Leon Belly, Eugene Deschaze, and Narcisse Berkshire. Their mission was to participate in the study of different populations living in Egypt while all studying Egypt's historical architecture. They were to draw, paint, and take photographs of the interesting things they witnessed during their short visit. On November 18, 1855, they disembarked from the boat nicknamed Osiris in the city of Alexandria. They rented a dahabeah, the Jafar Pasha, in order to travel up the Nile, making many stops along the way during their 15-day visit, immersing themselves in the country's views, admiring Thebes and its ancient remains. Bartholdi will bring back 200 calotypes. He favors views without a defined subject, dusty street corners, small merchants, boats, trees, and landscapes, and portraits of his companions on the boat going down the Nile, all with a very short sense of composition. He also brings back many drawings. The imposing series of feminine women drawing water are so many allegories of river divinities, which perhaps inspired Bartholdi with his taste for fountains." End quote. In April 1865, Bartholdi traveled solo on his own expedition to Yemen. He stayed there for 2 months before returning to France. During this time period, he produced many works, having been inspired by what he witnessed during his missionary travels. According to the book called Displaying the Orient, Architecture of Islam at 19th Century World's Fairs by author and professor Zeynep Selik, states, quote, "Although under the Ottoman suzerainty since 1517, Egypt acquired a semi-autonomous status in 1805, when Muhammad Ali was appointed governor. This status lasted until 1882, the date of the British occupation. Muhammad Ali initiated a series of military, economic, and administrative reforms, relying on the expertise of French and Italian advisors. These reforms were followed by legal and educational transformations and the development of infrastructure, paralleling the changes promoted by the Ottoman rulers in Istanbul. In 1867, the Ottoman Sultan conferred on Ismail Pasha the title of Khedive, giving him a special position in the empire and allowing him to sign independent technical and economic agreements with foreign powers. The 1867 Universal Exhibition in Paris was marked by important visits from Khedive Ismail Pasha of Egypt. What were the goals in visiting this exposition? Ismail Pasha pursued a Western model of progress and wanted to be recognized for his institutional reforms. Similarly, Ismail Pasha's goal was to demonstrate his alliance with Europe by announcing the modernizing transformations in his own country. Ismail Pasha was intent on reshaping their cities according to European models, a goal reflected most dramatically in the physical transformation of Cairo. The city building in Cairo was comprehensive. A new quarter of Cairo, named Ismailiyah after the Ismail Pasha, extended the city to the west with a design that superposed a pattern of radical streets on a grid. Long avenues ended in squares or round points. Monuments and buildings defined the ends of vistas. The model was once again Baron Haussmann's work in Paris Indeed, French architects, landscape architects, and gardeners were commissioned to beautify Cairo. For Ismail Pasha, who had lived in France, the expedition was an occasion to catch up with the social and physical transformation of Paris. End quote. Now, at the 1867 Universal Exhibition, Egypt ruler Ismail Pasha took the unprecedented step to interview European sculptors for the purpose of placing monumental sculptures on the new streets of central Cairo. Upon his return to France, Frederick Bartholdi was commissioned to sculpt a statue of John Francis Champollion, an Egyptologist who was said to have deciphered the hieroglyphs on the Rosetta Stone. This statue was displayed in the Egyptian Pavilion at the 1867 Exposition Universal in Paris, where the Viceroy of Egypt, Ismail Pasha, was impressed with the statue and praised Bartholdi for his works. He entrusted Bartholdi with the creation of a monument to be placed on the northern side of the Suez Canal in Port Said, so the inauguration was scheduled for the end of 1869. Now, what's important to note here is how this particular part of the story was said to remain confidential, and that Americans must create their own version of the monument's backstory. Continuing on, Bartholdi hoped to build a colossal statue for an immense lighthouse as a personification of Egypt. It was to be a towering female fella dressed in Islamic-style clothing, holding up high a torch in one hand that will light up the entrance of the Suez Canal at dark. It was to be known as Liberty Enlightening the Orient, or Egypt Enlightening the Orient, referencing the progress of Egypt, which I will break down even further here in a minute. In a book called The Statue of Liberty, A Transatlantic Story, Icons of America, author Edward Berenson mentioned that, quote, Bartholdi produced a series of drawings in which the proposed statue began as a gigantic female fella, end quote. Ismail Pasha halted the construction of Liberty Enlightening the Orient due to the time consumption and the cost of the project, where many French and European voluntary and involuntary laborers died during the construction of the statue. So the project was not rejected because it resembled a peasant woman, as some authors and historians would still falsely claim today, because slaves, or rather peasants, were in fact employed or obligated to build the statue lighthouse, just as well as they were used to build the canal itself. And that is according to multiple sources that have recorded documentation about this topic. This also proves that the original statue was not built in order to honor the abolishment of slavery in general, simply because slavery was still ongoing during this time period in Europe, France, Egypt, and other Islamic countries throughout. So after the project failed miserably, according to the Haut-Rhine Departmental Educational Documentation Center, quote, Frederick Bartholdi joined the National Guard of Paris as a squadron leader during the Franco-American War of 1870 and 1871. He obtained leave to participate in the organization of defense in his hometown, but when Colmar fell into enemy hands, he left Alsace and entered the service of the National Defense Government, which appointed him liaison officer and aide-de-camp to General Garibaldi. The news of the annexation to the German Empire of Alsace and part of Lorraine increased his commitment alongside the Republican defenders of the freedom of the peoples before determining his adhesion to Freemasonry. During a first trip to the United States in 1871, as soon as the conflict ended, Auguste Bartholdi had the revelation of the ideal site for his great monument, Batlow Island, today Liberty Island, the first piece of the New World, at the entrance to the harbor of New York, obligatory passage for the crowds of immigrants from Europe. Created shortly after, the Franco-American Union brought together personalities from both countries to launch the subscription in favor of the Statue of Liberty. End quote. So, in other words, during his first trip to America in 1871, just after fighting in a war for his hometown's sake, he was inspired to place a monument at the entrance to the harbor of New York on Bedloe Island, now known as Liberty Island, which was said to be the first piece of the New World. Now, keep in mind that it would only be considered a new world to foreigners or immigrants from other countries of other continents as a means to have a new beginning, a fresh start, a brand new life without the worry of being overworked, or rather, intense enslavement. This also gives us reason to know that the placement of a statue or monument built by a Freemason Frenchman is a utilitarian means of directing crowds of incoming immigrants from Europe toward the safest route possible when entering their new world, by following the light that's projecting from the statue lighthouse. Also, it was noted that Bartholdi later created a congregation that included French and American idealists, ranging from sculptors and painters to politicians and governors of foreign descent. The congregation was officially called the Franco-American Union and was established in 1875, 4 years after his initial visit to America. In its entirety, this congregation was a group of Freemasons that elected popular French writer Edward René de la Boule as its president in 1875, due to his background in writing elegant poetry and informative articles for newspapers in France, adding his anti-slavery approach within his writing and speeches, which garnered the minds of the French and other European people who have suffered from intense poor living conditions as peasants under their government's rulership. So, La Boule was considered a prominent figure amongst the French and other Europeans, and even the newly made Americans of foreign descent. Electing him as the president of the Franco-American Union was a perfect fit for gaining the attention and the hearts and minds of the United States government, in hopes of accepting Frederick Bartholdi's original idea planned for Egypt, but reconstructuring it in order to match the agenda of the newly established American Constitution of 1871. See there? Before the Statue of Liberty was brought in multiple puzzle-like pieces to accommodate traveling from France to the United States, to be built together and placed on a custom base or pedestal in the New York Harbor in 1886, the Franco-American Union was responsible for marketing the unfinished statue to the public in hopes of earning donations in order to fund the project. Once they realized that the indigenous Americans' interest in the project was 0 to none, they transitioned into selling admission tickets to the public of France, hoping that the inside of the largest portions of the unfinished statue would become a profitable public attraction and would help fund the project into its completion. So the Statue of Liberty was never a gift from France, as if their French government gave it to the United States for free, when it was this union of Freemasons that took the money they earned to build the light as a call for help from other immigrants to their new world at night. Kind of like Commissioner Gordon turning on the spotlight to call Batman to help their people at night.
I'm just here to make you think.